All right, so we've got a really interesting one today. You've given us a ton on bike safety articles, news, even your own notes on Gazelle bikes. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it seems like your interest in Gazelle is no coincidence. As we dig into this, you'll see they're kind of leading the charge when it comes to bike safety.
I'm intrigued, and it's perfect timing, right? Because your notes mention cycling's booming globally, which makes sense. Healthier, cheaper, good for the planet.
Right.
But here's the kicker. More people are riding, but statistically, the risks of getting seriously hurt actually went down between 2019 and 2020. How's that possible?
Right. It seems counterintuitive, but it shows how much innovation is happening at the same time. It's not just more bikes, but smarter infrastructure, new tech, even laws are catching up.
Speaking of laws, you included that article on California's new law, AB 1909, the one letting cyclists treat stop signs as yields and red lights like stops. Big debate about that one, but it could be a game changer for safety and how smoothly traffic flows.
It shows how even small law changes can mean a lot for bike safety. That one's based on the idea that forcing cyclists to fully stop at every intersection can actually make them more likely to get rear-ended. It's about making the rules work for how cycling actually is.
That makes me think of that 5Es framework for bike infrastructure you sent, too. It's not just about bike lanes, it's got to be a whole system.
Exactly. It's about making cycling not just tolerated, but truly supported. So you have engineering, designing roads with bikes in mind from the start. But then there's education for cyclists and drivers.
Huge. Because knowing the rules is one thing, but sharing the road safely, whole different story.
For sure. Then there's encouragement, getting more people cycling, but safely, of course. And you can't forget enforcement, making sure people actually follow those rules. But the one that often gets missed is evaluation.
Because what's the point of all this if we don't check what's working and what's not, right?
Precisely. It shows it's not about just personal choices or one-off solutions. It needs a whole system for safer cycling.
This is the goal, right? Being able to just enjoy the ride. And that's where Gazelle comes in. They're doing some really cool stuff, like being part of that coalition, developing vehicle-to-everything tech, V2X.
Now that's where things get interesting. Imagine your bike talking to cars, traffic lights, even other bikes, all in real time. It's about creating this network so everyone's aware, which could drastically reduce accidents. Your bike could warn you about a car running a red light before you even see it.
Hold on, are you serious? That's straight out of a movie. How does it even work? Sensors or something?
It's actually a few things combined. Some systems use DSRC, dedicated short-range communications, basically, Wi-Fi made for vehicles. Others use cellular networks, or even both. But the idea is cars and bikes with this tech send and receive data about where they are, their speed, which way they're going. It's like they can see each other, even around corners or in traffic.
Okay, that's wild. But big question here, data privacy. With all this info going around, is anyone worried about security? Who can see it?
$1 million question for sure. V2X could make things safer, but yeah, privacy and security are huge. Audi, a big player in this, predicts we'll have 61 million connected vehicles by 2030.
61 million, that's a ton of data. So how do we make sure it actually makes things safer without, compromising our privacy?
That's the challenge. It's something policymakers, tech companies, even cycling groups are all trying to figure out. One idea is making sure the data is anonymous and encrypted so you can't tell which vehicle or rider it's coming from.
Makes sense. So Gazelle being part of this, it's like they're not just making the tech, but also thinking about the ethics, which, knowing you, probably isn't a coincidence you picked up on that.
You got me. It shows how companies like Gazelle are becoming part of this bigger conversation about cycling's future. They're not just building bikes anymore, they're shaping how we ride.
And this isn't just for show, right? They're actually putting this tech in their bikes.
Yep. And what's interesting is how they're mixing this cutting-edge stuff with more classic bike design elements. You mentioned the Gates belt drive, for example.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the first things that jumped out at me. A bike that needs less maintenance, smoother, quieter ride. Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But how did that fit into everything else we've been talking about?
It might seem like a small thing, but it's part of this larger trend of making cycling easier and more enjoyable, breaking down those barriers for new riders, encouraging more people to choose cycling as a safe, green, and fun way to get around.
It's like they're thinking about the whole experience, from that first ride to, well, the reality that bikes need maintenance sometimes. But let's be real for a second. As much as we love these advancements, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There are still challenges for cyclists.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new tech, but realistically, cycling still has risks. You even found that statistic about Over 130,000 cyclists injured annually, just in the U.S.
Yeah, that one kind of stuck with me. It shows that even with all this progress, we're not there yet. Tech alone isn't a magic solution.
Exactly. It's got to be multi-pronged. We've gotten good at passive safety, like helmets, lights, but now we're seeing more active tech, like V2X, trying to prevent those accidents. But even then, there's still human behavior, infrastructure, even economics playing a role.
Speaking of economics, you mentioned those tariffs on Chinese imports. How does that factor in?
Huge factor, especially with e-bike safety. Tariffs on those Chinese-made e-bikes could really make them expensive, possibly pricing out the people who could benefit most: commuters, older folks, people with disabilities.
Right. If you can't afford the bike in the first place, the safety features don't matter much. So this could be where a company like Gazelle, being European-made, has an edge.
Exactly. If those Chinese e-bikes get too pricey, Gazelle's in a good spot, especially if they play up that premium safety-focused image. It just goes to show how global politics can impact everything, even down to what kind of bike someone buys.
It's crazy how connected it all is. We started with your interest in Gazelle, zoomed out to global bike safety, and now we're back to economics and international stuff.
It's all related. But amidst all this big picture stuff, you also found that People for Bikes guide on making better cycling infrastructure, which brings things closer to home.
Oh yeah, that was a good one. Real practical advice for communities that want safer streets, no fancy tech or trade deals required.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools to improve their own cycling environment. One big thing they highlight is pushing for complete streets policies. Basically, designing roads for everyone: cyclists, pedestrians, transit, and yeah, cars too, but in a way that's fair and safe for all.
It's not just slap it on a bike lane as an afterthought, right?
Nope. It's a whole different mindset, making cycling a core part of how we design our cities and transportation. And what's cool is the guide talks about all these different ways communities are funding this stuff. It's not always big government money. Sometimes it's parking fees, sales taxes, even tourist taxes, like you mentioned before.
Right. That was fascinating. Shows there's more than one way to make cycling safer. But even with the best infrastructure, the best tech, you still got to factor in us, right? Human behavior, personal responsibility, that plays a big role.
Absolutely. You can't underestimate that.
It's kind of like you can give someone all the tools to be safe, but they still got to use them, right?
Totally. And that brings us back to that education part of the 5Es. It's not enough to just know the rules. We need a culture where everyone on the road is looking out for each other.
And that's not something you can just program into a bike or write into law. It takes like actual human connection and understanding.
You got it. And I think that's what's so interesting here. We've gone from hardcore tech like V2X to global trade to something as basic as how we treat each other on the road. It shows how complex this whole issue is.
Yeah, for sure. It's been quite a ride, and honestly, I feel like we've just scratched the surface. But that's what makes these deep dives so great, right? They get you thinking, wondering, wanting to learn more.
Exactly. It's about giving you, the listener, those starting points to keep exploring on your own.
Because at the end of the day, the more you know, the more you can actually do something, right? The more we all understand about bike safety, the tech, the rules, the challenges, even our own responsibility, the better we can make things safer for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And that's really what I hope you take away from this. It's not just about listening. It's about sparking that curiosity, that drive to get involved and make a difference.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. What's stuck with you from today's conversation? What new ideas are you taking away? And most importantly, what action, big or small, will you take to help create a future where cycling is safer, more fun, and easier for everyone to enjoy?
Keep those wheels turning, and until next time, ride safe.
The Herd Podcast is produced by the Gazelle International Owners Group on Facebook. The managing editor and executive producer is Gary Fujioka Sr.